Hi folks, welcome to Medcan Presents, the twice monthly webinar series that we do every other Tuesday, at 12:30 p.m. Today's webinar is Predisposed, How Genetics is Transforming Health and Wellness, and that's with Medcan's team of geneticists. So essentially today is going to be an Ask Me Anything kind of format where we're hoping that the people who are attending the webinar will actually ask questions, and you can do that either by chat or through the Q&A function in the webinar app. Okay. Also, we have the poll. I see some people have responded to the poll, and we'll get through that once we've introduced all of our guests. Okay. So Allison Hazel is the director of genetics at Medcan. She earned her master's degree at Sarah Lawrence College. Jessica Gu is a board certified genetic counselor and the clinic lead for genetics at Medcan. Justin Lawrence is a genetic counselor at Medcan and lead of the male oncology research and education program at Sunnybrook Odette Cancer Center. How is everybody today?
Good.
Good.
Are we ready to talk genetics? We're ready. We're excited.
Always.
Beautiful day. It's hard to be in front of a screen when it's above zero. And what is it? It's 8 degrees, I think, right now, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, let's quickly go through the poll, and then Allie, we'll go through your the kind of explainer about genetics and where we are today. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So how informed and engaged are you with respect to your genetic information? Super engaged. We have 0% are super engaged. We have 33% who have had their DNA tested, have found that process fascinating, and they're eager to learn more about genetics and wellness. 44% are curious informed. 22% are curious uninformed. I don't know much about DNA, but they're eager to learn more. That's great. Allie, Jess, Justin, would that sync with the people you're seeing kind of through the course of your practice? How enthusiastic are the people you're seeing about DNA and genetics in general?
I would say that I agree that people who come to see us are not apathetic, uninformed, but we do actually get people who are super engaged, I think, just ready to take on any genetic test that becomes available and have done all of their reading. But I would say the majority of our clients do fall more in the curious category.
Definitely.
So I will say one thing, in that we have thrown a bit of a complicating factor on our genetics counselors, and that is that we are going to limit your answers to 1 minute when we're actually responding to your questions. And so when that happens, folks, it will add an element of urgency, and we're hoping a little bit of fun to the process as well. So Allie, do we want to move on to the explainer part of this process?
Yeah, I thought maybe before we kind of jump into the kind of program details, it might be interesting to hear, from this group what they found were the most interesting stories of the past year from a genetics perspective. So I thought maybe we could start there, and then I can give an overview of the Medcan genetics program before we jump into questions.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just advance our slide.
Okay, so I'll start it off. I think one of the stories that's kind of gotten lost in the millions of COVID stories we've heard over the years is really just taking a step back and reflecting on how quickly the viral genome was sequenced, and also how prolifically kind of the sequences were shared around the world. So really what this timeline is showing is that it was 10 days from when the World Health Organization was first notified about this kind of curious cluster of pneumonia-like cases to when the first genome was publicly available of the SARS-CoV-2. And so if you contrast that, if you go to the next slide, I just put a timeline of the Human Genome Project, which, you know, went on from 1990 to 2003. So basically 13 years to sequence the first human genome, and comparing that to kind of the 10 days that we saw in early 2020. I think just highlights kind of how quickly we have, or how far the field has come. And these two things together, like being able to sequence the genome quickly, but also the global sharing of the sequencing data, were two foundational elements that really contributed to us being able to test for COVID, develop things like antibody testing, and ultimately impact kind of vaccine development as well. So to me, this is kind of a good news story within a, you know, obviously not a great situation. Justin, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll take over from here. So, I mean, getting more into pop culture, there were a couple of genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2, which haven't really been well known as a household name for a gene until Angelina Jolie wrote an op-ed in Time magazine and talked about her experience as being a BRCA1 carrier. We know that this is a cancer-protecting gene. It increases risk for breast, ovarian cancer in women, and male breast cancer and prostate cancer in men. And after she had this op-ed in Ontario, a certain clinic saw an increase in referrals by about twofold. We call that the Angelina Jolie effect. And so it's kind of a testament to how you know, knowing about genetics and popular culture can really help people get some kind of sense of awareness about what these genes are and how they can impact them, perhaps. Next slide. So more recently, in 2019, this man also had, or I guess kind of came out to say that he has a BRCA2 gene mutation. So there's two of these, BRCA1, Angelina Jolie had, BRCA2 he has. And he's famous, although he may not be recognizable. I think my source might be giving me away here. Really, his daughter is the more famous one. If we can go to the next slide. Beyonce. So this is Matthew Knowles, Beyonce Knowles' father, who has a BRCA2 gene mutation. And this was identified, or he talked about this in 2019 based on him having male breast cancer, which we know can be associated with men who have BRCA2 mutations. But in contrast, we didn't see any increase in referrals for men getting genetic testing for BRCA1 and BRCA2. And so, although just as many women in the world have BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutations as men, still a little bit of a difference in who's being seen and assessed for that. And so a recent kind of pop culture finding in the world of genetics, at least cancer genetics. That's it for me.
So I'll speak to this one. I'm thrilled to talk about it on the heels of International Women's Day, but last year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to two women, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer A. Doudna, who wrote a landmark paper in 2012 about a very promising gene editing tool called CRISPR Cas9. CRISPR Cas9 is a bacterial defense system, actually. Bacteria use it to precisely recognize viral genetic sequences if they've encountered a virus before, and upon re-encountering that same virus with a potential infection, they use the Cas enzyme to precisely cut the viral DNA only and destroy invading viruses. And obviously, a lot has to be done to go from this being an infection protection tool to a gene editing tool, but it is already being used today in practical applications such as agriculture, but also in humans in treating cancer and hereditary conditions that cause blindness.
Okay, thanks guys for entertaining me there. So I'm just going to give a quick primer of around what the Medcan Genetics program is in advance of getting to some questions. So essentially, our program focuses on proactive genetic testing in order to give people information that will allow them to be more proactive in their approach to health management and screening, and ultimately, ideally preventing disease. We've been doing this for a long time. So the Medcan Genetics program was established in 2005. And we were the first clinic in North America to actually integrate genetic counseling and genetic screening into the primary care setting. So over the years, obviously the program has evolved, and we've added new programs and services, but we have been around for a while. So if you go to the next slide, Chris. In terms of the genetics landscape, there's obviously a lot of different types of genetic tests that one can do. People have different reasons for seeking out genetic testing at different points in time. And as I mentioned, Medcan really falls into that quadrant of medically actionable and proactive testing. But I do find it helpful to think about genetic testing on a continuum. So, on the one axis, you have recreational genetic tests that are done for fun. Versus medically actionable tests that are done with the purpose of actively screening and ideally preventing the onset of a new health condition. An example of recreational here would be ancestry testing, or companies like 23andMe that offer information about traits, ancestry, some disease risks, but ultimately these tests are not really intended to be used for medical management or health purposes. And then on the other axis, you have reactive versus proactive approaches to testing. So I have traditional genetics clinics in that bottom right quadrant. Traditionally in the hospital setting, you do genetic testing once someone has developed symptoms that kind of are indicative of a genetic disease, or family history is concerning enough to warrant genetic testing to try and figure out what's going on in the family. And in these cases, if you and your family members meet criteria, there may be targeted genetic testing available to you for a specific condition. So in contrast, at Medcan, we use our program, the other way. So we're using genetic testing proactively so that individuals and families can know in advance whether they have an increased risk for developing a health issue, and that's so that we can screen for it and, as I mentioned, in some cases prevent it altogether. Okay, so next, if you go to the next slide, just in terms of, the types of tests that we offer, or what people, when we see people in clinic, what they're actually coming for, there's sort of three different buckets or categories. So the first are people who are wanting to be proactive about personal health and risk. So this involves genetic testing in healthy individuals for things like hereditary cancers, heart disease, plus other types of conditions, respiratory, blood disorders. The second area we focus on is related to medication response. So the technical term for this is pharmacogenomics. And we know that for many medications, there's genetic variation in kind of how an individual will metabolize a certain drug. So right now, we see this is most relevant for the areas of mental health medications, cardiovascular, and pain medications. Obviously, there are others that fall into that as well. And then the third bucket or category is prenatal and reproductive. So we offer non-invasive prenatal testing, which is typically offered to pregnant women at or after 10 weeks of gestation. And it's a blood draw that's done on the mom that helps to screen the pregnancy for chromosomal disorders. And then also reproductive carrier testing. So this typically is couples who either before they get pregnant or early on in pregnancy get testing to determine whether they together are at a higher risk to have a child with a rare genetic disease. So that's kind of the quick overview in terms of what we are doing currently. And I think maybe now we'll move on to some questions.
That was great. Boy, I loved the quadrant, the quartered square graphic, because I think that really, it really specifies where things are and where Medcan falls in the grand scheme of things. So proactive, can I just get a clarification on a couple of those before we move on to the actual questions? So proactive, but will Medcan also do the reactive tests as well?
So in Ontario, once you're eligible, then typically the government funds the testing. So if someone's eligible under OHIP, we will recommend that they get that testing through the OHIP system. And those traditional genetics clinics are really designed to see families like that. So that tends to be our recommendation, and we focus on kind of that proactive area.
With respect to Matthew Knowles and Beyonce, did Beyonce end up getting tested, and what ended up happening there?
Yeah, you went there. Good. Okay, so yeah, whenever we find one of these gene mutations, we always have the option of doing what's either called predictive testing or cascade testing, where we can then test other family members to see if they also have this gene mutation. Genes are inherited from one generation to the next, and they're passed on from one generation to the next. And so from what I gathered, Beyonce and Solange both tested negative for the BRCA2 gene mutation. So this is something that's only impacting him and that he did not pass on to his daughters.
Fantastic. And how, is that unusual? Like, is that, what would how frequently would it have passed on to the daughters? Or is that something that you guys can answer? I'm sorry, I'm just asking these at a.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. No, it's good. Yeah, so this is having a BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation is what we call a dominant form of inheritance. And that means that if you have a mistake in one copy of your BRCA2 gene, there's a 50% chance you pass it on at every conception. And so every pregnancy is an independent thing. And so it's 50% at every pregnancy. If you have 3 kids and 2 of them got tested and both are positive, and your third child is going to get tested, it's still a 50-50 chance that that third child will have inherited or did not.
So we do have questions from the audience or the webinar attendees. So why don't we do we'll start with the questions. This one, and perhaps Ali or Jessica or Justin, perhaps you can say who wants to handle this first, but how accurate is the genetic testing in finding compatible meds? So I from what I understand, this is the pharmacogenomics, pharmacogenetics or pharmacogenomics. Who wants to handle this one? Why don't you raise your hand, and then I'll share my screen and get the timer on board.
I'll give it a shot.
Jessica. All right. So okay. So are we ready? 1, 2. Are you ready, Jessica?
I'm ready. All right. So for pharmacogenomic testing, these variants only play part of the role, meaning we can find that you are at higher risk to have side effects or reduced efficacy with certain medications, but we cannot with genetic testing guarantee that you will develop side effects, which side effects you'll develop, or whether you'll have a response to the medication. And that's because so many non-genetic factors do play a role in medication response. So this goes, this includes age, your weight, other medications that you're taking, whether or not you are a smoker, things that you eat sometimes. And so while the genetic testing is very advanced and very promising and accurate, there were no guarantees from that genetic testing result to whether you'll actually experience what we tell you the risk is.
That was really impressive. And you didn't even sound like you were speaking quickly. So that was actually pretty amazing. That was really, really good. Does anyone have, Ali or Justin, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll take the extra 8 seconds and try and add that I think it also depends on the type of medication. So we know that there's certain medications that have that stronger component and some that don't. And so part of that, some of that is kind of what we talk about up front in terms of when you're deciding whether or not to do this test and whether it's gonna be helpful for you.
Okay, fantastic. This next question I think is also gonna go to Jess. And that's just kind of the luck of the draw. We'll get Ali and Justin. I hope you guys don't feel too ignored. But so how is what Medcan does different from 23andMe? And so we had that quartered square a little bit, but let's get a little more in depth into it as much as we can within the space of 1 minute. So Jess, are you ready? How is what Medcan does different from 23andMe?
So beyond what Ali said about doing 23andMe mainly for recreational purposes. One big difference between these kind of direct-to-consumer tests and what we do at Medcan will be the scope of testing. As an example, 23andMe will test for 3 BRCA1 and 2 mutations that are seen in the Jewish population, but there are actually thousands of mutations and 19 genes in total that we include in our testing. So you're getting a small snapshot of the picture versus comprehensive genetic results. The other thing that's come about recently is questions in terms of the accuracy of the testing. So there was a 2018 study that showed that 40% of results from these direct-to-consumer tests were false positives. And a recent study this year that showed that the positive predictive value, meaning the chance that a positive result is a true positive, is only 4% for these companies. So just something to bear in mind when you're considering genetic testing. I'm out of time.
Wow, that sound, I didn't realize the sound was gonna go, but that's interesting. Well, do you want to speak to that a little bit more, Jess? Like, just finish that thought, because I did think that was fascinating.
Yeah, so ultimately, when you have a clinical genetic testing lab, they are using potentially a more comprehensive, more accurate technology with conformational testing methods and guidelines for how to interpret genetic testing results. We don't necessarily see this coming into play with some of these direct-to-consumer tests. Additionally, they might specifically be interested in certain genetic variants, and so won't actually do thorough or accurate analysis of the other variants nearby, but allow clients to access that data. Telling clients that it's not accurate doesn't necessarily mean clients will not use that data to try and do more analysis themselves. And so part of those studies have looked at data that is analyzed by these companies and data that's shared but not analyzed by these companies. And there has been inaccuracy seen in both fronts.
So, Jess, do you have situations, or Ali or Justin, do you have situations where somebody has said, you know, I took a 23andMe test, or I took another of the tests, and I just want to be sure? Do people come in and come into Medcan for that?
We have the occasional client who does, but something that I think is a better indication of this is that there are individuals who have a BRCA mutation identified on these kind of direct-to-consumer tests. They want to get the recommended surgeries. Those are not things they are eligible for in Ontario until that result is confirmed in a clinical lab. So you can imagine that you do not want patients undergoing unnecessary surgeries because of a potential false positive result.
Great. Okay, next question. Where is the genetic testing done? I think this is in reference to, you know, so you actually get the procedure, you get the blood draw taken at Medcan, but the question I think is asking, where is the testing actually, like, where does that blood draw go, essentially? Who wants to handle this one? Ali, I think yes, great. Okay.
I was waiting. So we partner with different commercial genetic testing labs, and one of the things we're pretty our criteria for who we partner with is pretty high. So we do, whenever we're introducing a new test, we do pretty detailed vetting of the various labs that we work with. So yeah, the answer is the testing is done at different commercial labs. Most of these labs are in the US. We do have some Canadian partners as well.
Fantastic. And so fast. Justin, let's get to you. How is the genetic testing actually done? Is this a saliva thing? Is this a blood draw? Is this a breathalyzer? Maybe, I don't know.
The breathalyzer, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yep. I can tackle that one. All right. So testing is typically done through a blood sample or through a saliva sample. When it comes to taking blood samples, you know, typically people are getting genetic testing done in a medical facility, and so while they're already drawing blood for other things, they can then draw blood for genetic testing. Blood's taken from white blood cells, which are prevalent in blood. DNA is taken from white blood cells that are prevalent in blood. When it comes to a saliva sample or a buccal swab, a swab of the cheek, they look at skin cells and white blood cells. And so as long as you can access these white blood cells or these skin cells, you can extract DNA from it. So it doesn't matter which source. Just historically, we've been easier to access blood samples because you're in a medical facility. Sometimes it's harder to get DNA from smaller quantities of cells. So when you're getting a skin cell or a cheek swab, or sorry, a spit sample, you're not getting as many cells, and so you're not getting as much DNA. But however means you get to accessing DNA, we're good. That's it, time.
Fantastic. So follow-up question, in, like CSI and stuff like that, when they're actually getting a DNA sample from like a coffee cup or something, is that for real? Like, is that just the stuff of Hollywood?
Oh yeah, that's for real. I mean, they can get DNA from mummies. And so I have some of my colleagues in genetics who have a huge tube of blood on someone, and they're like, okay, we have to get this off to the lab right away. And we're thinking, hey, if you can get DNA from a mummy from thousands of years or hundreds of years ago, you can get DNA from the sample within like a week. And so, yeah, we have the ability nowadays to get DNA from coffee cups, from Q-tips, a whole bunch of different things. Maybe eventually they'll be doing it from eyelashes and eyebrows. It's just a matter of kind of extracting all of that DNA from such a small amount of cells. It's a little bit trickier, but it's still doable.
Fantastic. It's amazing. It sounds like science fiction, really. So we do
so much of this stuff that we'll be talking about, I think, and that we already have talked about, is a little science fiction-y.
So we have a question about NIPT, non-invasive prenatal testing, which my wife and I, we did that through Medcan, and it was just a fantastic experience. You wonder to do it or not, but then you do it and then you just feel so much better about it. So anyway, does NIPT make amniocentesis? I'm not sure that you guys will have to clarify on this, but is that used to confirm NIPT or for other purposes? Who wants to handle that? Okay, we're gonna say what, Allie?
Jess,
okay.
Jess already answered it, so Jess, you answer.
I started typing an answer, so I guess I can read it out loud. I do think it's a great question. So the pronunciation is amniocentesis, which is an invasive procedure, but it is the gold standard for accuracy. So while NIPT has made amniocentesis a less commonly considered procedure, it is still recommended to confirm a positive NIPT result. And it also is recommended to test for certain conditions that NIPT cannot cover. So one example would be if you had a family history or a known mutation of a specific single gene disorder. NIPT only looks at chromosome conditions, so amniocentesis would be the way to look for those single gene conditions.
Fantastic, that's great. This is a super fast question that somebody has asked. How many patients at Medcan do genetic testing? I guess we're looking for a proportion here. I don't think we want to get into raw numbers. Probably that's proprietary, but do you want to speak to how frequently this is happening? And maybe actually one of the interesting things is how this is trending relative to past years. Are more people doing it as time goes on and as the science develops?
I can take that. We see kind of a rough estimate, about 10% of clients who are coming in for their health assessment will choose to add genetics into their day. And yeah, over the years, definitely the interest has increased. I think also as our ability to offer more things has increased. We do see more clients kind of on a yearly trend who are opting into genetics, and people are more comfortable with it, and it's just become a bit more less science fiction-y over the years. So yeah, 10% is kind of the ballpark number that we're seeing.
Fantastic. Okay, that's great. I think this will be our last question as we're heading up to final time. And I do think this one is interesting. So can you give an example of how proactive genetic screening has positively impacted someone's life? And I think let's look for a couple of examples here. Justin, do you want to go first? And then maybe we can move on to Jess afterward.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, an example that I can think of, my kind of default is to move into the world of cancer genetics. There's a patient who had a father who passed away at a younger age from a motor vehicle accident. And this client knew quite a bit about dad's side, but not a lot of specific details about the family history there, knew a lot about the family history on mom's side. was interested in doing proactive genetic testing to get any health insight that they might be able to use to manage any health risks going forward. And they found a gene mutation in the gene MLH1, which is associated with Lynch syndrome, which is a condition that greatly increases risk for colon cancer. And then in women increases risk for uterine and ovarian cancer. And this man had a colonoscopy 3 years ago. They found a polyp, but otherwise it was pretty normal. And then we referred him on to a GI clinic downtown where he gets colonoscopies every year now to manage that risk. And then his mom and his sister can get testing to see if they also have this increased risk.
Well, that's going to be that. Jess, do you want to finish that? Justin, let's just quickly finish that, or are you done basically?
Oh, I'm all good unless you have any questions. I'm sticking adamantly to it. It's my personal challenge to finish right on the dot.
All right, Jess, let's go with you.
I can talk about maybe a cardiac case. I was involved in one where a client had come here for his health assessment. On his health assessment, he did have some non-specific changes on his ECG and had been referred to a general cardiologist. Family history, I think I remember he had an aunt who had a significant heart issue, but we don't have any details on what that issue was. He was interested in being proactive through genetic screening, and we actually identified a DSP gene mutation, which is associated with an increased risk to develop a heart condition called ARVC, or arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, which can be quite significant. And this result led to his cardiology referral being redirected to a specialist on ARVC. And we also now know that his 4 children could have inherited the risk, so they are going to be tested as well. So quite interesting to see how that potentially fit into his personal and family history.
That's fantastic. That's great. And this has been so informative. I think we'll start the wrap up, but does anybody, Ali, Jess, or Justin, does anybody have any closing comments that you want to address before we move into the wrap up?
Having that time is stressful.
I'm going to use it for a lot of people, I think, in these webinars, because it does enforce succinctness, which is really nice.
Yeah. No, it was great. Thank you for everyone for coming.
All right, let's get back to, the slideshow, play from start. So we're gonna go all the way through. We see Beyonce, we see Matthew Knowles. Curious about genetic testing at Medcan. Learn more by emailing genetics@medcan.com. And any, Ali, Jess, and Justin are seeing people every day and are incredibly great and well-informed and on the cutting edge of this stuff. And so, and you would get one of you 3 or Heather, right? As a genetic
or Jill Furnival.
Or Jill Furnival. Let's not forget Jill Furnival. Great. Medcan presents future webinars. So March 23rd, we have Make Your Lunch with Medcan. Tired of the same old sandwich? Join Nourish Executive Chef Jason Smith for a fun interactive webinar where you'll learn how to make the new Nicoise bowl. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but let's hope so. In just 10 minutes. We're trying something new here. I'm not sure how this is going to go, but why don't you come with us and experience the adventure of Jason Smith cooking. It'll be a lot of fun. So register at bit.ly, make your lunch. And then Medcan presents other resources. The latest podcasts are a part 1 and 2 conversation between Leslie Beck and Michael Moss, the author of Salt, Sugar, Fat. So you can find that at eatmovethinkpodcast.com/podcast. Thank you so much, folks. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the questions. Thanks to Ali, Jess, and Justin, and have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.